John Gibbons, a former United States Marshal for the District of Massachusetts, has died. Gibbons retired in August of 2021 after more than 4 decades of law enforcement. He was the first African-American U.S. Marshal for the District of Massachusetts. He'd been appointed by President Barack Obama in December of 2009 and sworn in January 2010. Gibbons began his law enforcement career in Massachusetts, serving for 30 years with the Mass State Police prior to his taking the Marshal position. Springfield Mayor Dominic Sarno sent us some pictures of Gibbons along with a statement that reads in part, quote, "First of all, I'm so sorry to hear about the passing of retired U.S. Marshal John Gibbons. My sympathy, thoughts, prayers, and encouragement go out to his wife Shelby, brother Ron, family, and friends. I spoke with Marshal Gibbons not too long ago to see how he was feeling. Always the gentleman and a well-respected lawman." Hampden County Sheriff Nick Cochi also offering a statement. "The world lost a good man today as my dear friend, retired U.S. Marshal John Gibbons, passed away. During his career spanning 30 years with the Massachusetts State Police and over a decade as the first black U.S. Marshal in the Commonwealth, John worked on some of the most high-profile cases. On the job, he was incredibly talented and dedicated to finding justice for victims day to day. He was a great friend and a loving family man."